The views and opinions expressed by the guests of the Inspira Podcast do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of any agency of the United States government or any organization, public or private.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Inspira Podcast, hosted by your girl, me, Erika Mueller Chen. I'm an international development specialist with over a decade of experience leveraging the amazing power of sport to promote peace and positive social impact. My career has allowed me to live in Europe, Southern Africa, and Latin America. In 2022, I accepted an offer for my dream job in sports diplomacy. And I also became an employee family member to a U.S. diplomat, aka an EFM. This podcast is all about inspiration and career advice. Each episode, I'll interview an inspirational global changemaker working in sport for development, social impact, or the diplomatic service. This series is perfect if you have interest in breaking into one of these sectors, or you've already landed that dream role and are keen to learn from thought leaders. Enjoy today's episode and stay inspired.
Confirmatory kind of sports for development is about monitoring and evaluation, is about proving that sports for development works. Well, when we decolonize, the argument changes. If you ask me, does sport work? I'll ask you, does education work? Would you prove to me that schools where we have the most educated, there's no crime? Schools where we have the most educated people, there's better life? Well, it's what kind of education, it's what kind of sport leads to good outcomes. Decolonial critique allows us to change the argument, and I'm all for decolonizing the space.
Welcome, friends. Today's special guest is Dr. Oscar Mwaanga. Dr. Oscar is a legend in sport for development, and if you read his professional bio, you will probably learn that his professional career has traversed in higher education, international sport for development, social entrepreneurship, and innovation. Dr. Oscar is currently the program director for the International Sport Management and Innovation at the University of London. And during the past 20 years, he's co-founded a number of world-renowned sport for development programs and methodologies, which I hope we'll speak about today, including Edu Sport Foundation, Kicking AIDS Out, SFD Peer Leadership, and Go Sisters. So welcome, Oscar. It is an honor, it is a privilege to see you, to speak with you today. How are you and where are you joining us from?
Erika, thank you so very much for having me. And I am doing very well. And it's a real honor for me to join you in this, what I think is very progressive conversation that you've set up, an opportunity for us to come and, in a very casual way, share our experiences in sport for development. Thank you for that kind introduction. Sometimes I forget that it's actually 20 years, I don't know where the time is going. I'm joining you from Southampton, England today. I am definitely originally from Zambia, so I'm always between many geographies. And thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. Well, before we get into some of the questions, Oscar, because I've called this podcast Inspira, I like to weave in some inspiration at the beginning, if not throughout the entire conversation. And if it's not obvious to you, you inspire me, Oscar, especially because you were one of the first in this space, one of the first to create, to introduce, to innovate this idea and this methodology that sport can have a positive social impact. And I imagine we'll speak about it today in terms of how that came into your life in a really personal way, and also how you've transformed into the academia space, not just a practitioner, not just an academic, not just a monitoring and evaluation person, but really wearing all of these different hats. You really inspire and motivate me in this space. So thanks again.
Well, likewise, I think stars attract stars, Erika. And then they form galaxies together. I think that's what we're doing, because I don't think you're one thing as well. I don't think you're one thing. I'll be talking about this, but think within sort of like the Western, if you like, perspectives of knowledge, we require people to be one thing. You're a mathematician, or you are just in one silo. But actually, in reality, people are more than one. You're a parent, you're a brother, you're a sister, and in your profession, there's a lot of intersections, and you're never doing one thing at a time. And I think I've learned to embrace that, and I've learned to try and see how I can act in all those roles, effectively as much as I possibly can. So, but really, if that has inspired you, I appreciate that. I have to say, this opportunity is an inspiration for us to tell the story as well. As you know, one of the things I'll be speaking about really is representation in sport for development. Who has a monopoly on representation? And so for you to go out and give a platform for those voices that sometimes are never heard, I consider as my voice. It's not one of the voices that is heard as much. Women voices, voices from the South, voices from different ethnicities. That is inspirational, to say the least.
Happy to play a small part in that. So let's jump in, Oscar. I've really been eager to ask you more about yourself and your thoughts. And to start with, I'm curious if there's an African parable or African proverb that you feel describes your career journey and how you've moved from Zambia to the UK.
Ooh, you got me there, Eric.
I know you're ready, though. I know you can handle that.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot. There is a proverb or a Zambian saying in my native language, which is Tonga, that says, go and fend for yourself, because a chick has to do that. So you think of a hen and its chicks, it watches the mother as the mother, looks for the food, and then it learns from that, and then it goes out. So it's not really like a human baby that has to depend 100%. In my native dialect, it says, Galiyangile tambo manangu utalelwa. Go and fend for yourself. Do everything you can, because the baby chick is not carried by the mum. I think that's a direct way to put it. It's not fed on milk. So, but I think there is an extended application to that. There is my agency in there, that through my journey, I've had something impressed upon my heart, which maybe is not the case with others, about my life purpose. Then I went from what I read on the tablet of my heart. This is what I need to do. But there's this aspect that says, even for that chick, it's together with other chicks, so it has to be part of a team. It needs the guidance of the mother hen. So the knowledge that is passed through the mother hen to the chick, it's part of the whole community. So it's a community of the hen and its chicks, but also the agency. So moving from Zambia, I've always known that there's going to be a hustle that I'll have to put across throughout the journey. But when I left at the airport in 1997, I remember my dad telling me that, he had retired from the army, and he said the only plane I'd been on is a military craft. I've never been outside this country. I don't know what it means to be out to go abroad, but I believe where you go, you will find your sister. If you look carefully, you find your brother, and you find your parents. And for me, that was, there's going to be good people there that will open your doors. But even those that shut your doors will teach you that there's something that you can learn from, a door shutting in front of you. And maybe you have to learn how to unlock it or how to push it. There is going to be a benefit either way, but just go in and know that the world has people. Zambia is not the only place where there are people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oscar, for sharing that very beautiful proverb, and one that I feel is quite relevant even now through your career, because it touches on your own individual agency and connects it with the importance of community. And that leads me to our next topic. I'm wondering what your early experiences were like as you started to inspire the sport for development movement in sub-Saharan Africa at the turn of the century, specifically with the goal of tackling the HIV and AIDS epidemic in Zambia through sport.
Yeah, and wow, I really haven't spoken about it for years now because we are all talking about COVID-19, but there was actually the epidemic of HIV/AIDS that was very informative. It was one of the reasons why I began to look for solutions, on what I could do. And I like the way you phrase your question that, it's almost like saying the problem was the opportunity for the solution, the two faces of the same coin. And I hope I can convince you that actually one of the things that Sport for Development needs to learn to do is not to separate the recipients of the Sports for Development interventions from their problems. That sometimes you overload them with international problems, with sustainable development goals. You got to let them be in their local environment, and then they'll show you their humanity, because humans are curious. Humans like to solve problems. Humans like to do things together. So in the beginning, HIV/AIDS can be scary, and it was, because we lost beloved people. My father was literally among the first people to be pronounced HIV positive.
Wow.
And then miraculously, he survives up to date, but he lost all his friends.
Wow.
When they were announcing to him that he was HIV positive, it was such a rare condition that they had a team of doctors had to sit around him to tell him, this is what you have. And how terrifying that could have been. We were, that was maybe in 1994, around about there. So when I was, graduating, about to graduate as a teacher, my dad had retired. He was in the army. He had retired, and then I stayed with his nephew, and he was in the army as well. And he unfortunately had HIV/AIDS as well. So I would leave my basketball team that I was coaching to go and nurse him. Sometimes I would leave my lessons to go and support him. The school was literally next to the hospital where he was. So we sit around, and I saw his struggles, and I thought, I wish I became a doctor. Maybe I would have found a way to help him. I have a very strong Christian spirituality, not Christian religion. I search for my own gods, if you like. So the fact that my God was colonized, I have to struggle to find my own God, and my own God is in here. And I go inside myself, and I said, how could I wish I could help my uncle struggling right now. And then there's a scripture in the Bible that says, when people came to Jesus and said, people are starving, can you do a miracle? And then Jesus said, what do you have? And their response was nothing, which just 3 fishes and 2 loaves of bread. And then he said, give me that. Even God operates from somewhere. Even a miracle cannot happen without nothing. So what did I have? Well, I had a basketball in my hand. I had sport. And then I had to begin to think, what can this do? I had to believe that there was something I could do to be part of that struggle. And then I thought, young people like to come to sport, and this epidemic is really after young people. So what if we could serve ourselves as young people when we meet together? And really, that was the whole idea. That was the genesis of the idea of peer coaching. So I thought about peer education, which was thriving in education, where young people were trained to become mentors and educators of other young people. In the sports context, I thought, well, young coaches would be peer coaches. And little did I know that would become, a thriving methodology that would inspire a lot of work. And so that was me, really. So I looked at, my basketball team. I said, now, every time we meet up together, let's share experiences about what's going on in our homes with regards to HIV/AIDS, and how can we prevent, how can we educate each other. And that is how the whole thing started. And then I left Zambia to go, and when I graduated as a teacher, I went back to the same school to teach, and then I went to work for the National Sports Council of Zambia. And in '97, I had the opportunity to go and study in Norway. So I would visit Zambia, because the Norwegian scholarship was really good. It allowed me to visit Zambia many times, and through my visitations, I thought it wasn't a chance to really set up this organization, because at the National Sports Council of Zambia, when I presented this idea of HIV/AIDS education through sport, which was shortened to be Edu Sport, they were like, "Nah, it's that can't work." No, it can't work, and not you. You don't have we don't come up with ideas like that over here. We wait for ideas to come from America and England. Literally, I mean, people are saying that. No, you don't.
Wow.
Hey, look, it's a good idea. Why don't we just, we can't do in this epidemic right now. We just can't do sport for the sake of sport. We can try and be responsive. Well, in Norway, I met an anthropologist by the name of Dr. Amfin Soli. When I began to talk to him about it, he went to Zambia because he was a consultant for NIF. He went to address the National Sports Council board, and he said, look, you need to think of ways of how sport can respond to the epidemic. And they were like, yeah, we should do that. And I said, yeah, why don't you think of, educating young people through sport? And they were like, fantastic. We love that idea. And he said, thank you very much. It's not my idea. It's your idea, because it was this young man I met by the name of Oscar who told me. So that would be how the whole journey started. So we set up EduSport in 1998, registered in 99. We had a group of girls that we trained as the first peer coaches, and they went in the capital of Lusaka, a suburb called Kabota, and it was girls. So again, we had a big challenge of how to get the girls to the out of the teaching space. So I remember going to parents one by one, explaining to them that they shouldn't worry because their girls will be safe in the space. And then I remember one parent asking me, and actually this parent, he was the mother to the auntie to Annie Namkanga, who's now the current manager for women football at the Football Association. I remember her asking me, so tell me, if my girl goes to do what is it? I said, age sport? Yeah, whatever it is, football out there. Who's going to marry her? I was like, ooh, I didn't think about that really.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, thought about it. Nobody's going to marry a girl who runs around in the community. And I was saying, well, but if we pay for her education, maybe she'll marry somebody. I was actually having a laugh. Maybe she'll go out and say, I'm educated, I'm going to marry you. And she was like, I'm not laughing. I'm like, well, I'm just thinking. And well, that's what happened, because we had this program of school sponsorship. We told the girls, if you go in the community and coach girls younger than you in life skills and sports skills, we will pay for your school. If you do nothing, we'll do nothing. If you do something, we'll do something. Boy, did they do a lot. We regretted saying that, because these girls were such dynamic young leaders. They went in the community. Honestly, Erika, today, they are young mothers who are getting their girls to football. Women football in Zambia, we are going for the first time to the World Cup this year, and
Wow.
it's because of these girls. It's because of the Edu Sport girls, the Go Sisters girls, the Kicking Heads Out girls. So it's been a journey, and I am so, yeah, I never take it for granted. I'm humbled every time I think about it, that it was challenges. The Football Association did not appreciate women football. The parents doubted it, but we persisted. The girls loved it, and that's how it went. So out of the whole dark HIV/AIDS era, we had a birth of the Sports for Development movement in Zambia.
That's incredible. Just the legacy. I mean, you in your lifetime have been able to see that generational impact, which not many people can observe. So that's really exciting and really validating to see those cultural norms and aspirations evolve, right? It sounds like they
Absolutely.
existed in some way and they're evolving, they're shifting. One follow up I wanted to ask you about the programming itself. I know that Kicking AIDS Out was really the beginning of other methodologies that you were able to invent and introduce into the space. Not only Edu Sport, but Edu Move, and then more recently, Edu Kicks. Could you speak to maybe how you continued to identify these opportunities or these gaps where your initial methodology could evolve and could address different challenges. Challenges not only around lack of physical activity, but also around racism or other things that really need to be expanded and shifted, whether it was in Zambia or internationally.
Well, absolutely. That's a great question, Erika. I think it was my firm belief in education that actually education, not just information, but education that transforms. The idea of the fact that if you give people the tools in terms of information, in terms of education, they can go out and transform in whatever space they find themselves. But you gotta give them the authentic tools. You can't lie to yourself that you just colonize them through education. You gotta empower them through education. So education has always been the thing for me. I think I'm a teacher, and my parents were firm believers in education. Believe it or not, my dad, he had to leave Zambia. Then it was before British independence. It was Northern Rhodesia, and he went to Southern Rhodesia to go and work in homes and everything to raise money for his education. He only managed to go to sixth grade then, and then joined the army, and then continued to educate himself. So he was a firm believer of education, and he transmitted that to me, and I've always believed in that. And then I also found myself to be in love with sport. The military camp where we lived, we had free access to sport. So my dad, I'm told he named me Oscar because there was a great boxer by the name of Oscar. But I went into boxing. He wanted me to go to boxing because I wanted me to be tough. I didn't like the punches to the head, but I got an opportunity to experience different kinds of sport. So the combination of sport and education has always been something that creates an interesting intersection for me. It's been a space for my questioning. What is possible? What is possible here? So education and sport, they do one thing: they bring people together. And once the people are here together, amazing things happen when people are together. They can learn together. They can learn to question together, and that's what happened. So we started with HIV/AIDS education through sport, then which later was called Kicking AIDS Out, looking at young people and not thinking of them pedagogically as blank spaces, but thinking of them as having information, having education, information that you need to rearrange for them to actually empower themselves. Having tools already, but helping them to understand the tools they have so they can use them to actually empower themselves. So they already had that, and so we had to think of how do we give them the opportunity to go out and coach? How do we give them the opportunity to go out and become referees? How do we give them identity so they can become useful in their lives? So that was one side of it. The other side of it was actually when they came together and we used movement games to break the ice. So if we wanted to talk about something that was not easy to talk about, like condoms, how do you do that? So we would put condoms at the end of the playing field and say, dribble the ball, get to the end of the playing field, pick anything there that you think is important for HIV prevention, and come and tell us about it. So you dribble the ball, and they'll come back with nothing. So what happened? Yeah, what was at the end there? I don't know. Okay, I'll go again. You know what? Go again. Go dribble the ball and bring something that is an object there. And then they would go back, and then they would come, put it in the pocket, and they would struggle to bring it out. And when they did, we had the conversation. What is this? What does it matter for you to understand this? So then that idea would make me think that, well, when kids are doing sport, somehow they laugh for no reason. They're just happy. And school is not a happy place. Then EduMove became an idea for me. And I learned later on scientifically that every time you move, you create happy hormones. And I was like, oh, that is why we laugh then. Okay, so why don't we use movement as a modality to promote education? So all the kids can be happy. But while they're creating they're activating this natural pharmacy of cheap endorphins, they can then learn as well. So how can we introduce in England, in schools here in England, we introduced what we called the smart mile, for instance. Schools were required to, at one point they were required to walk around the playing area, for at least an hour a day to score the mile. And then I said, well, what if you pair children according to their strengths and weaknesses? If one child is good at maths, can you pair them with one who's not very good at maths? And as I take the walk around, they can be quizzing each other. They can have a conversation around that. And the maths teachers were like, wow, let's try it. We tried it and we called it the smart mile.
Yes.
So absolutely. I mean, it's been just going in there when we had the issues of racism, difficult topics to talk about. Again, we went to movement. We went to, we had an app where, you almost like a board game, you pressed on the phone, it went around and you had a question. If it was a question of racism, you answered. If it was a challenge on physical activity, you did the physical activity challenge. So it was always there. It was always there.
Quick break here with a special message from your host. This episode is being released in celebration of the United Nations recognized International Day of Sport for Development and Peace, which takes place annually on April 6th. Each year, champions of the sport for development sector use this day to raise awareness of the incredible work that individuals and organizations are leading across the globe to leverage the potential power of sport and play to drive tangible impact and positive social change. I hope that listeners, whether an enthusiast, a skeptic, or a novice in this space, that you find the conversations I facilitate on the Inspira podcast to be informative and inspirational. If you enjoy this podcast, you would be a rock star if you went ahead and gave it a 5-star review with a complimentary written sentence or two on Apple Podcasts or your chosen podcast platform. Enjoy listening and happy April 6th, everybody.
3, 2, 1, yeah!
Thank you for those really specific and practical examples. I know the listeners are going to love them. And even just thinking about my friends and family who I speak to about the sector, who maybe haven't connected those dots like you have in your life, or that you've seen that power of sport. It can feel like such a mythological concept, right? Like sport's just going to help things, but it's
mythological concept.
But it could. And it feels like that to me sometimes when I'm like becoming this champion. I'm like, okay, I need to come back to reality because, not only to be realistic for myself in the sector, but for other people too, to communicate it in really clear terms. And I feel like you did that. And the other thing I just want to say is that what you're speaking about also seems really helpful for parents. Not only for teachers and government officials, but just helpful for people around kids. What would you say to that? Or have you seen, real life application in your life or kind of other parents' lives as well?
Yeah. Well, I'm a parent myself, and I remember trying out some of these activities with my daughter, and she's now very empowered young lady. She's first year in her A levels over here. And she is very academic. Please don't blame it on me. It has nothing to do with me because the kind of academic she is she's doing physics, maths, and chemistry for her A level. So
Wow.
I'm like, no, I don't know nothing about that. But so we used to do these activities together, and again, it was the opportunity to be together. Because most of the time as parents, we are trying to instruct our children and not having a conversation with them, not learning from their world. We occupy different worlds. And what we need to find is some common activities so our worlds can meet. And for me, sport has been one of those. The games I play has been one of those activities where we can meet together. And we during the Black Lives Matter, we played the game a lot, the EduKicks game. We did a lot of that, and through that, she began to learn about some of the questions that were there about the Africa she never knew, and she said, how come I don't know this? I said, well, that's what, education sometimes is not really empowering. It's colonizing. She went to British schools. She went to English schools and never learned about colonialism. And so she learns about the Great Britain that went out to discover the lost world or the dark world. So she was sometimes like, how come I never learned about that? And that again made us to have that conversation. So I think for parents, it is an opportunity. You have to look always for opportunities where you are not just instructing your children, but you're having a conversation, you are sharing experiences, and sometimes you're even learning together. Really, really important.
Mm. And you started to talk about just now, Oscar, the importance of focusing on decolonization, which I know has been a huge emphasis for you this last decade. I'm wondering if you can speak more about your work in decolonizing higher education and curriculums, and perhaps speaking a little bit more now about what you're doing at the University of London.
Yeah. So at the University of London, I am leading the working group on decolonizing the curriculum, which is a huge opportunity for me because the program we're running is a very interesting and unique program. The International Sports Management PG set, postgraduate certificate, believe it or not, has got students from 71 countries across the globe, really. And these are very unique students because some of them are leaders of federation. One of our students is a president for rugby in Peru. We probably have the largest number of Olympians and former Olympians on a program.
Wow.
So these are people that they share one thing in common. They want to make a real difference. And so the question for me then is, they're going to make a difference. They need to appreciate the world order. The order of things, or that in the world that we live in, is such that Africa should be where it is, and the global north should be where it is. So even our education institutions actually produce that. Our economists, we train them to understand that Africa should provide the raw materials. Africa should not process. Africa should provide the cheap labor. Africa, historically, that has been the relationship between the North and the so-called global South. So as an educationist, you have got a choice as to whether your program is going to reproduce that or conform and reproduce, or it's going to resist and transform. I believe that these two take you to different places. They don't take you to the same place. And for me, that is the responsibility of decolonization, that we must look at the past and understand how do we find ourselves where we are? Is it possible for me to have a relationship with you without having to dominate you? Is it possible for me to relate to you and through our relationship to give you back your human dignity? And I believe it is. So I started to have those questions when I was really young. And believe it or not, I brought it to the EduSport Foundation. I said, I imposed that Ubuntu would become the organizational philosophy of EduSport. And we would be inspired by people like Mandela. I remember one of the offices we occupied in Zambia, on the wall we had, sports, makes a difference, Mandela's famous quote. And then, people like one of Mandela's friends, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, who I spent 2 hours with in Norway after he retired from presidents, and his son had died of AIDS, and he came to support me at the Norwegian University of Sports Science to speak about it. And then he invited me to his place, and then it was such an honor to actually speak to this man who Mandela visited when he was the first man Mandela visited after prison because of the support Zambia gave South Africa. So I was intrigued by how these statesmen committed to the spirit of humanity, not just Black humanity, but all humanity, how they fought that if Zambia has to be free, it's incomplete until South Africa is free, until Zimbabwe is free. So Zambia as a country was involved in the liberation of almost all the 8 neighbors that Zambia has. So that was how I was brought up. And therefore if my humanity was always connected to other people's humanity, and that was the Ubuntu, I am through you, my humanity is completed through you. And that would become the organizational philosophy for Edu Sport. And I think that was like important. But I discovered many years to my disappointment that a lot of consultants from the global north who came in, they never captured that. It was never interesting for them. When I told the story about this Ubuntu, it never appeared in the literature after they did evaluation of our programs. And I was really disappointed. Until then, I began to read through my master's and part of my PhD that actually Africa doesn't tell its story. Africa should not have its own philosophy. You know, my language is supposed to be replaced. My identity in the colonization project should not be there. What should be there should be what the British brought to us. And as a result, there's an assumption that we shouldn't have our own religion, we shouldn't have our own worldview, because here is a worldview that is brought to us. The Christian worldview, there you go. This is your God now. Forget about all the gods you've had. This is your education now. There's never been education here. And so I even when people came to us and said, "Oh, this is fantastic. Your ideas about kicking heads out, this is amazing." When we wanted to go to, they'll come and really criticize us. Some of these consultants would come in and tell us everything wrong that we're doing. And then when I went to some conferences, I would find them presenting about our work. And then I'll be thinking, what is going on here? So I learned as a young leader then that the struggles that Kaunda and Mandela were facing were, in a small way, the same struggles we're facing, that we were not meant to tell our own story. Our story should be silent because somebody can tell it better. Our views and our presence is invisible because we don't validate our own visibility. We don't represent ourselves. So that was, for me, why I said what created me through my education system, the problem that created my lack of confidence as an African, my doubting my own skin, being politically problematic, that creation is a creation of coloniality. And that is what I realized, that this is something that I had to start to challenge. And then over the years, then I began to really speak from this place. And when I went to the University of London, I had an opportunity to actually push that agenda and engage with colleagues around that.
Wow, that must have been a cool 2-hour meeting. I'm still thinking about that. Wow. And Oscar, it sounds like what you're talking about a lot here relates to your own positionality, and something that you shared with me before we started the call, the fact that you are a diaspora academia practitioner, activist, and how that has really influenced not only your lived experiences and your interests in this space, but really what you see and feel as you navigate through those different spaces. How can you kind of respond to that?
Thank you so much for that question, because it really, sometimes you have to engage in a very relaxed conversation like this to go back to the story that has created you. Colonization is a system. Racism is a system. Gender-based discrimination, those are systems. Those are systems that are created because, and these systems collaborate in different domains. So what you see in the media and how, say, Africans and Black people are presented, it's almost like the media and the religious institutions speak together, because Jesus is white and he's got blue eyes, and then you're thinking, well, okay, where is my Jesus? And then you go to education, you find, all the authors are white, and then you're thinking, well, where am I? Oh, well, I should just receive. I'm a receiver of information which is already packaged for me. Now that information then creates me in a particular way. So it can be very emotionally, if you like, frustrating. And then what you then respond with is an emotional response individually, which is not a systematic response. So what you need to do is step aside and say, well, I need to study this beast. the coloniality based Western modernity. What is this really, and how does it affect me? And then I realized that I won't fight this in my lifetime. This was the battle that I had to call upon others. It's a battle that required a lot of wisdom because growing up, the enemy, because of what happened in South Africa, the enemy was white. That's what I was raised to believe. The enemy is white. So when you see a white person in the street, you have to go and report. That's how I was raised. And then my friends that helped me set up Age Sport, they were Norwegian. My son's godfather is a Norwegian, the one that taught him to swim. He believed in my story, and I found that actually it's not white people, it's particular people within the Western system that have to create a certain system to protect their interests. It's not why all the white people that put black people on slave ships. It's not all white people that were involved in what happened in Germany. So we need to, I began to understand that within the global north, there were partners that would join me in this agenda. We were now starting to create a system. And that system would be done through education, through the family system. What do we do within our families? And so if you look at the example of the girls we worked with, we focused on the family, telling them that one day they'll have a family. What if they had to raise their boys and girls, how do they do it? They began to look at the family as a systematic response to certain oppressions. They had to look at education as a response to particular oppressions. So systematic response for me has been key, So I see myself as an epistemic activist. I look at the structures of knowledge. I look at how knowledge has been used to create the other in ways that we can discriminate easily. Before people are killed in the Holocaust, there has to be the coining of the term racism, which categorizes people and then puts them in a particular hierarchy, and gender is part of it. So if you're male, you're white, and you are most likely going to be on top of this hierarchy. So privilege is going to follow you. If you are not any of those, then you find yourself a little bit lower down. If you're too low, you might find yourself in a gas chamber. If you're too low, you might find yourself on a slave ship. So really, this hierarchy, for me, is where we need to say that was false science. There is nothing like racism. There is difference in ethnicity. The Black people of Australia and the Black people of Africa are, the genetic similarity between the Black people of Africa and white people is closer than the Black people of Australia and Black people of Africa. So you cannot really pinpoint and say, there are races, there are ethnicities, and racism is a construction of modernity and coloniality that should privilege others and marginalize others. So this idea of knowledge as a structure, the way we produce knowledge in our research, the way we teach, actually is something that we call epistemic violence. So the violence that we create through knowledge is real. At the end of the day, you get tribes like in Australia completely disappear because of the violence. These social theorists like Duque, that the research they did and how they went to they confirmed previous research on Duanism, that actually the native Australians were inferior humans and their spirituality was inferior, which has been disproved right now, but they had to be created in a particular way. So when they are not treated well, it could be justified. So episteme, culture side, people's culture are killed, people's identity is killed before they are physically killed. So the physical killing is actually the final piece in the puzzle.
Wow.
So my activism is really to go in front of it and say, we don't have knowledge, we have knowledges. We need to think of a future, we dare think of a future where knowledge is coming from all places and from all times. Knowledge is not an ownership, is not owned by one person or one group of people. Because of this idea of, because of coloniality, we don't have sufficient understanding of women's experiences. I mean, this day and age, we don't have an understanding of how menopause, for instance, affects work. This day and age, we don't have that. Why? Because historically, women were not privileged to be a source of knowledge. We've missed an opportunity to understand how the native, the indigenous Americans were so in tune with nature, how they saw their bodies, or they saw themselves as not owning nature, but being part of nature. They were part of the trees, they were part of the soil, they were part of the water. Now, if these objects that I've mentioned are part of them, they couldn't have cut them ruthlessly, like what we've done to the Amazon basin because of Western modernity. All right. So maybe the way they saw the world is not mythology. Maybe they experimented with life and created traditions that were sustainable in the way they engaged, that were respectable to nature, as opposed to, growth. Let's go and cut. As long as we can cut the trees, we can make this. If we find oil in the ocean, let's think of how to extract it, forget about what happens afterwards. That kind of Western sort of like modernization, industrialization, is the one that needed to be challenged. But it had to be created in such a way that there was only one hegemony to knowledge, which is the Western epistemology. So for me, decolonization means to decenter with the Western canon, to appreciate that there are other knowledges, and no single form of knowledge tradition should sit in the center. We should all sit around that center in that analogy. So we can, if you like, only God sits in the center. The God of knowledge that we create ourselves is the one that sits in the center. So that has been, for me, thinking about how do we respond. So if you think of sport for development, really, you have to ask the question, is it decolonizing or is it really colonizing? If today you find that most of the publication in sport for development is still Global North. If today you go to a conference, I've been to conferences where I sit there and I'm thinking, oh, wow, I wonder why I wasn't invited to speak here. Many conferences, people come to you privately, oh, Scott, thank you for the work that you've done. People that I have trained over the years who are from the Global North sit in places. I can mention organizations here that came to Zambia and said, oh, we should partner together over the years. And they turned around and they bought us off and they got everything because the Zambian government itself preferred them to us. Why? Because this colonization is sometimes in the mind. Policymakers in Africa, academics in Africa are custodians of this colonization because it puts them to be gatekeepers of certain places. It puts them to be on top of other people. So yeah, maybe I'm not white, but I'm educated, I have a PhD. You don't have a PhD. Therefore, it's me between you and them. So I am, if you like, using the Nigerian term, I am your oga. I am your big boss, in knowledge. So that idea is one that we need to understand and then challenge. And for me, that has been the epistemic activism work.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Oscar. I already know I'm going to re-listen to this conversation many, many times because I have a lot to learn. Many people have a lot to learn, and I really appreciate what you just shared there. Is there anything important to you that we haven't been able to cover yet?
Yeah, I look back and, at the turn of the century, maybe there were 5 sport for development organizations in Zambia, in Lusaka, especially in the capital. And I'm told now that there are hundreds. Now, the sad thing, Erika, about it is that they are little begging baskets. They are all competing for the little money promised by NIF, promised by UK Sport, Commonwealth Games Canada. We're talking about $5,000 here, $10,000 here. My young brother opened my eyes to something that I always believed in, but I never appreciated it. So he worked at a toll gate. When you're coming into the city, there was a toll gate which was erected there in 2013. The amount of money that was generated from that was ridiculous. And today we have these toll gates across Zambia now generating substantial income. My question if that income, maybe 5% went to sport for development, it would make people believe that we do have resources within ourselves, and we don't have to wait. It would make people actually believe that the former colonies of France, allegedly, they don't have central banks in Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Mali. They still send their money to France this day and age, which they should keep as their money. And they are made to believe that their survival depends on French aid. My question is, which sports development do you choose? The one that says that's okay, or the one that says there's another way out of here? And unfortunately, for the ones that are inspired in Zambia, most of them are not looking for innovation, they're looking for aid. And that maybe is one thing that saddens me. That is one thing that saddens me, because there is land in Zambia which they can go and learn how to own, because people that have got wealthy families own land, and there's massive tracts of land in Zambia which they can learn to own. There is opportunities for them to engage in innovative ideas, and there's government support to some extent. So that's a bit that I look back and say, I wish I had not promoted the idea that it's sport for development aid. It's actually sport for development, and you have to own the idea of development. You have to sit down and say, what development are we talking about? And can we actually have a conversation? Is this actually empowering? Does it make me better by doing this activity? So that's one thing that I think. And then a positive thing that I've seen over the years is that there has been moments when sport for development relationships actually confirmed our humanity. I can tell you the number of people that got married across the global north and south. Sport for development. So it was it's like they saw it confirmed Ubuntu. They saw their humanity in the other person. So you don't marry somebody you don't believe is a human. So there you go. So that is something really positive that we can say, we confirmed our humanity because we thought, yeah. And what these people are doing is very authentic, because you have husband and wife coming from that space, knowing what the real issues are, engaging with the local reality, and having access to the global space, and really trying to make a real difference. So that for me is something that I always think, positive and the negative.
That's really interesting, Oscar, what you shared about the need to move away from that aid mentality, like not only in practice, but mentally, just the structures that have been designed that you've been talking about this whole conversation, where people across different geographies are adopting these mentalities that perhaps are not helping them or their community at no fault of their own, but just the structures around them, and that need to really focus on empowerment and ownership, which can lead to sustainability.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the need of the West today. Aging populations. Africa, one of the biggest resources is young people. We've got unemployment in Africa, and the Africans believe they are stuck. No, they're not. If we engage in a different conversation with Norway, Sweden, we can train the nurses of the future. We can train the coaches of the future. And these, in the same global space, would be the ones that, talk about refugees. If we go to these refugee camps, and we were trying to do this refugee program in Kenya, I remember having this conversation around saying, okay, these so-called refugees, they are displaced from their homes, but there are people that have got various skills. If we focus on their skills and we tell them, wherever you go, carry this document that says you are a judo coach, you're a basketball coach. One day, if you end up in Italy, one day, if you end up in some space, they might need a basketball coach. And you might say, yes, I'm a refugee, but I'm a coach as well. A true human is a person of multiple identities. And our experience is about giving people back that multiplicity in their complexity, in their identity, because that's the richness of who they are. So in my view, I think that, the confirmatory kind of sports for development is about monitoring and evaluation, is about proving that sports for development works. Well, when we decolonize, the argument changes because we if you ask me, does sport work? I'll ask you, does education work? I mean, I'll ask you, would you prove to me that schools where we have the most educated, there's no crime? Schools where we have the most educated people, there's better life? Well, it's what kind of education, it's what kind of sport leads to good outcomes. So you can't ask me to prove that sport works by itself. Nothing ever works by itself. Everything works in collab with other domains. So decolonial critique allows us to change the argument, and I'm all for decolonizing the space.
And Dr. Oscar, I understand that there's an exciting milestone that you've reached in your professorship. And I'd love to invite you to speak more about being the first Zambian to be appointed professor of sport and what that means to you.
Well, it is humbling to a point of tears, if you like, to just think of the journey and think of where I've arrived. About 2 weeks ago, I got this letter from Kwame Nkrumah University, the leading education university in Zambia, where I trained as a PE teacher, and where I really had my first understanding of what it means to be, a professional in sport and physical education. For that letter to come from there, endorsed, authorized by the Minister of Education, because they don't have a standing council at the moment. So the Minister of Education recognizing me and saying, we want to appoint you as visiting professor, and identifying specifically the areas they want me to work with them, which will be decolonizing the curriculum, which will be, improving their online and distance education, programs, and also their physical education programs and sport programs. Those are very specific things, but they tell a story about people who sat down and said, this is where we can, invite, a person of my credentials to help them to move the agenda. But there is some stories about that place. It's called Kwame Nkrumah University. Kwame Nkrumah was the father of, a united Africa, the first president of Ghana. He was the one that said, seek ye first the political kingdom, borrowing that from the Bible, and everything else will be given. So he fought for a free Africa. He fought for a united Africa. And he inspired the president of Zambia then, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, to a point that he named that institution after him. He inspired people like Mandela to believe that it was possible for Africa to be one. Now, without a united Africa, we would not be able to achieve anything that was, worthwhile for the African. So, as I look at my own decolonizing work, I connect with that history. I see a spiritual connection and a purpose in my life that says it was the thing that I was called to do. It's a confirmation in a way that this is what I was called to do. And so I take that appointment with a sense of destiny that it is my destiny, but I take it with a sense of humility as well and responsibility, because I see this baton handed over to me by all these great forefathers of Africa, saying, here you are. We studied the political liberation of Africa. You are now going to liberate from the educational side of things, from the sport side of things. Hold on to this baton. It might be heavy, but keep it safe as you pass it on to the next generation. So my work at the University of Kwame Nkrumah University would really be making sure that I'll support in the creation of institutions within higher education, programs within higher education, structures within higher education that will ensure that the younger generation will do better than myself. I am humbled to the fact that I was indeed one of the reasons I believe, awarded me, because I was the first Zambian to have a PhD in sport. And then they wanted to complete that and award me to be the first Zambian to have a profession, to be a professor of sport. So it's a huge, huge honor for me. And I'm thankful for colleagues that nominated me. And I'm thankful for my parents and everyone along the way, my family, my wife, who've supported me to this milestone.
Well, congratulations again. That's truly incredible. And it also reminds me of what you spoke about earlier with one of your favorite African parables, because you talked a lot about agency and community. And this, I think, depicts that really well, because you've been able to pursue this work in decolonization because of your own agency, while your greater goal is really to serve community. So I'm just finding some similar threads across that, which is really exciting.
That's
Dr.
amazing.
Oscar.
That's amazing. That's amazing that you can see those threads.
Yeah. And one quick follow-up I'm curious about, if you've thought about it. I know this is still fresh news, but how might you anticipate approaching that work to decolonizing higher education in Zambia or an African institution when compared to your work decolonizing higher education in the UK?
Yeah, fantastic question. Decolonization cannot happen without collaborative work. When we decolonize, we do not intend to shame others. We decolonize because we imagine a future of inclusiveness. We imagine a future of ethical deliberation within our education. We imagine a future where we are talking about knowledges, not knowledge. A future that opens up for the knowledge that comes with the experiences of being women, experiences of being people of different abilities and disabilities, experiences of being people from a particular geographical location. We want to open up that space, and we want to believe that when that space is opened up, this knowledge is going to take us into a space of sustainability. If you give an example of climate change, we need to appreciate the fact that because of the coloniality of education, the voices, the histories, the knowledge of, for example, indigenous populations like the people of North America, that had an ideology that had a relationship with the earth in a way that they would not destroy the earth, as we have destroyed the earth, working from the modernity perspective. How can we think of incorporating them and their knowledges into our understanding of climate sustainability? The Ubuntu ideology says that I am because we are. Well, looking from a gender perspective, you and I are, to start with, human before we are our genders. Therefore, how can I make sure your humanity flourishes through our exchange? How can I make sure that you are completed through me? So these knowledges have never been privileged, because what the Western epistemology did was to take the center stage and make other knowledges invisible and make other knowledges not part of that reality. So what the work at Nkrumah is going to be going forward will be an appreciation of those deep philosophical viewpoints that say that this is not really just for those that were historically colonized. Because for Europe to colonize Africa, it had to establish one Europe idea that was excluding small Europe. There were other tribes in Europe that had to disappear for them to have one Europe. I mean, in England, we talk about the Welsh. Their language could have disappeared if care was not taken to understand that they need to be given that voice as well. So this whole agenda for me will be looking at how the work of African academics, the contribution of Africa in knowledge development at higher education and research will be seen as important by the West or Western academics. And therefore, the partnership between the University of London and Kwame Nkrumah University will be something that I'll be working towards.
Now that we know more about our guest's career journey, the rest of our conversation will allow us to have some fun and get to know our guest on a personal level through some rapid-fire questions. We'll then start to wrap up with pointed questions focused on advice and how our listeners can transform interest into action. Enjoy the rest of the conversation. Oscar, what's your favorite aspect of Zambian culture?
Interesting question, Erika. Really interesting. What's my favorite? You know what? I'll paraphrase the question and say Zambian cultures. So we have 73 dialects in Zambia, and to collapse them into one culture, that's a big ask. But there is some commonalities across the cultures anyway. But presently, we need to acknowledge the fact that there is the urbanized culture, which I can't speak too much about because this has happened in the time when, I'm getting older. But there is that culture that is quite strong across Zambian tribes in the villages. And that's the Ubuntu culture. When I travel in the Western society and I think of how the human nature has evolved to a place where we try to quantify everything. We can quantify a relationship. We can say, if you give me a handshake, maybe that's worth $2 or £2 or something. But that doesn't happen in some rural areas or historically in the Zambian context, where I remember walking with my animals across, different, villages for a period of 2 days and getting people just coming out to help us as if they knew us. They could have looked at us and said, maybe we stole those animals, but as soon as we proved that we didn't steal the animals, they took us in. They asked their own children to leave their bed so we could have a good rest to move on in the next morning. They gave us their food, which was not the best food, but it was the food that they ate themselves. That part of Zambian culture, which in some parts is being lost, is something that really touches my heart. Sometimes what I do when I go to the village, I buy bread. I like my brothers, they laugh at me, just like random number of loaves of bread. And as we drive around, we'll get this old man stopping us and asking for a lift, and then we tell him who we are. Oh, I know your dad, I know your mom. Oh, that's fantastic. And then he says, oh, so how are you? We are fine, sir. We were going to pass by your home, but since we found you, here is your bread. And then he would be like, oh my goodness, you remembered me. Then he calls the wives and says, can we please bless them with a goat? And I'm thinking, goat? I mean, it was just a loaf.
That's an upgrade from bread.
I'm like, no, actually, we're okay. No, this is not your goat. It's for my family, to your family. I want you to. And I'm like, oh my God, I wish, but there you go. It's somebody blessing you, somebody just not looking at the numbers of it, and that for me is a Zambian culture, or the Ubuntu culture, defending humanity, that we cannot quantify everything. Our humanity is the biggest value of what we have. And in a much more of a light side of the Zambian culture is that I remember when we went for sports as a kid, we had a song for everything. When we lost, we had a song and a dance on the bus on our way back. When we won, we had a victory song that everybody knew. So if our bus is passing through your village, Erika, you could just listen carefully. You would tell whether we've won or we've lost. And that was something that I never forget that. And you found the same songs. Some of them are still sung today, and the dances are still there. So I miss that part of our culture. We even through every challenges that we have, we still can dance. We still can have the song. So yeah, that's what I hope in a decolonized future Africa can share to the rest of the world. That regardless, so think of the pandemic, all the fears we had about the COVID-19 and how it would ravage Africans. And today, people just laugh and they say, oh no, the pandemic, COVID has just joined the group with malaria and everyone else. So we're just gonna live together and coexist. And that's just another aspect of the African culture.
Sport for development, advice, the next generation, Oscar. What advice would you give them on how to find their niche in the sector, and how to leave their mark on really what's needed.
Gwina chotika weze munyiga muno. Munyiga ipia. There is nothing you are carrying from the physical realm at your death into the spiritual realm. But there's something you can leave in the physical realm, which is the mark. One of the things I was really telling during the funeral of the Queen Elizabeth was when they took everything away from her, you go back as literally nothing. Everything, all the titles, they stay here. So this question of, we come into this world, the things, the intangibles like love, hope, faith, they're the ones we carry with to the next world. The physical things we all fight for, we don't carry them, but we can leave a mark in the physical world. And sometimes you don't have to think too big. The mark can just be the person you met and you said a word of hope because you played football together. It's somebody that needed help with a particular situation and you helped. Sometimes we pursue the big agendas and you know, the big starts from the small. So you can just be, for me, connect with your local community because that's your positionality. That's where it starts from. Connect, be in tune with your local community. You will realize that to the extent that you are in tune with your local community, somebody else is in tune with their community. And when you meet up, there'll be things that you can learn from each other, and there's things that you can teach each other. I don't think that the agenda should start globally. You know, I think the agenda should start locally and negotiated globally and back locally.
My final question that I love to ask all of my amazing guests, and that you gave me permission to invite you to answer in the local Zambian dialect, one of them. Who or what inspires you, Oscar?
Yeah, so it's not one, Erika, it's not one. At every stage of my life, I think my parents stand out. At this age, when I look back, being a parent, I've got a son 21 and a daughter 16. I'm like, yeah, they were my inspiration, seeing what I'm going through with my kids. So I think your parents, they give you the first milk. And you know, the first milk is the most nutritious milk. That's what gives you immunity. And if you extend that to everything about your life, so your first milk for knowledge, your first milk for wisdom, your first milk for resilience, for determination, they give that to you. And even, you know, the good health we experience sometimes is in the genes of our parents. So I'm appreciative of that. They raised 9 children, and how they did that, I have no idea. And that is just them not having as much education, Western education, but knowing so much about what we need to do. That was really inspiration for me. So, a humble soldier and a nurse, and I'm a professor. My young brother is PhD and medical doctor. And we've got entrepreneurs. This has just been, I think, that first inspiration from our parents, and also their wisdom of passing us on to the next level when they didn't know what it was. So I remember we built 3 schools from my years at Edu Sport Foundation, and during the building of one school, my mom turned up with a drink she wanted to share with everyone, and then some journalists went to mom and said, "Oh, so what is this? I mean, what is your son trying to do?" And then she said, I don't really know this Edu Sport thing, but whatever it is, just do what he tells you. So that inspired me. Like, that support from parents is great. But through my journey, my career, I began to really look at the forefathers of the African liberation movement, the Mandelas, the Kwame Nkrumah, the Nyerere, the Kaundas. Zambia was going, in my teenage years, Zambia was going through a time when we had to be involved in the liberation of South Africa, the liberation of Namibia, and all the neighboring, liberation movements were camped in Zambia. So we knew from the word go that our liberation was with the liberation of our brothers across the borders. So that is inspired me a lot to look at these forefathers and mothers of the nations, that they believed in this Africa, and straight away, all the work that I've done has just been to try and apply their work in sport. And so they were my inspiration. And then I've had great teachers along the way. Mr. Kakua, who was my teacher at at Nkrumah, and Mr. Nirongo, who was also my lecturer at Nkrumah. They're both passed now. They allowed me to stand on their shoulders, their strong shoulders, so I could see ahead.
Well, any additional words you want to share?
I would like to say that at this point, the Zambian that I am today is recognition of one Zambia, one nation, one people. And so in me is other tribes. I would say actually, may the sun shine ahead of sport for development. May the sun shine ahead. So in Bemba, which is one of the dialects from the north, they say, Kale Balika. We mona amakumbi ukufita. Don't focus on how the clouds can obstruct the sun's rays. The sun is always beyond there. May it shine. If it's not shining outward, may it shine from inside. May it shine for you, Erika, and for others that are coming to this space. Sometimes things may seem impossible. When I started the girls program, I never knew that today they would go to the World Cup. And I was just a small part in that. I think they were always going to journey to that direction. And so I say, Kale Balika. And then I say, by night, may the stars lead your way. The Inspira Podcast, and for me, it's groundbreaking. It starts to open up spaces for others to be able to share their story. So I'll end with a poem that I did for you, and it goes like this: my Southern sports for development story at last will rise in the sun. Due to the powers that be, my Southern sports for development story was hidden from the sight since the turn of the century. But your kind invitation gave my story a space, a place for it to shine with blustering grace. Your Inspira Podcast will carry the flame, an inclusive flame that forgotten and the untold story. The Inspira Podcast is an action of Ubuntu transformation that shouts out in a resounding voice, I am because we are. Thanks for the astounding vision. Our stories will live on. My Southern African sports development story at last will rise in the sun. Yes, the African sun, in the beautiful blue skies where it will inspire hope and faith for the young generation for many years to come. Thank you.
Oh, you wrote a poem about Inspira. Thank you, Dr. Oscar. It's always so enriching to connect with you and learn from you. I really, really appreciate your insights and everything you've shared today.
Thank you very much. God bless you. It was a great moment, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Inspira Podcast with Erika Mueller-Chen. I really hope you enjoyed the episode and found it useful. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and resources. Specifically, my LinkTree is there with tons of awesome information. Feel inspired to take action today? I've got 3 action steps you can take right now because you know your girl likes calls to action and the number 3. So here goes. Number 1, sign up for my mailing list by adding your email address. Number 2, check out my global resource hub and send it to someone in the sector who may be interested. Number 3, buy me a coffee. Or, if you know me, this will actually be a hot cocoa. Your support will help make sure this passion project prospers. All of these links are available by visiting my LinkTree. Until next time, stay inspired.